will be on shortly. You're live.
It should just go live by itself.
Okay, so the internet can see you now. I think I'll be alright. I don't know, but it says.
Well, you took what you did last time.
Yeah, last time was perfect, but this time it says we'll be on shortly.
Yes, that's what I have. So watch. Switch it.
Oh, so you get to.
Yeah, I'll switch it. So if you give it a second, it'll switch to camera.
I see. Okay, cool.
So let's make sure it switches to the other.
Yeah.
I threw up that break.
Sorry, I was thinking like, oh, it's YouTube doing this, but yeah, of course it's.
Good.
Yeah, there we go. Okay,
right.
cool.
Good.
Sweet. I feel like get out of the way now, don't I?
Also talk.
Yeah, also not staying there. Is there a chair behind you?
That was quite an intro. I've never been introduced as an international coding artist. International pop star, yes. International coding artist, king of pop, maybe. Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Jackson. Yeah, go ahead. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much to Dave and Jeff and the other organizers for putting this together tonight. We threw this whole thing together in just kind of a couple of weeks, which was really awesome. I'm in town this week doing a couple of training workshops, actually, over at Cengage. They're an education company over in the south side of town. And I'm over there doing a couple of training workshops for a couple of days, and I thought it'd be fun to come and hang out with a bunch of people who also love React as much as I do. So anyway, I wanted to get started tonight by, well, I guess maybe I'll tell you a little bit about who I am and what I do. So I run a company called React Training. You don't want to go to our website. You're probably more interested in the open source work that we do. So the most well-known thing that we work on is React Router. That apparently has some potential security vulnerabilities in our dependencies. Let's check them out together, shall we? Wow, apparently there are quite a few. 224 more dependencies. Do all of these have problems? Well, apparently it's the most bug-ridden project on the face of the earth. Yeah, I'm gonna have to look into that. If somebody has time to make a PR while I'm up here, that would be much appreciated. So anyway, so we work on this thing. I've been working on this thing for the last couple of years now, and it's been implemented on quite a variety of websites, from very, very large companies to very small. I also do a couple of other things. One of my side projects, this is kind of like a hobby of mine, a little passion project of mine, is called Unpackage. It's a CDN for anything that you publish to NPM, so that was actually kind of something that we spun out of React Router. People were asking us for our UMD bundle, and I couldn't figure out how to publish it to CDN.js, so I built a proxy for NPM instead, and then it got hosted by Cloudflare, so it's actually pretty nice and fast now. We do quite a bit of traffic on this site. We're almost up to doing about 7 billion requests a month, and a lot of data. So I couldn't do that without the support of Cloudflare, which is awesome. So yeah, so those are kind of the couple of things that you might know me for, and then a bunch of other open source code that I've written in the past. I currently live in California with my wife and 4 children. Yeah, and we're looking for a dog. So if anybody has any recommendations for a good dog, doesn't shed, I'd love to talk to you. Okay, so let's talk about some React, right? So React, I've been working with React for the last couple of years. It's been kind of a passion of mine. Honestly, it's kind of a funny story actually how I came to React. I was using Ember at the time, Ember.js. Any Ember fans here? Yeah, one. Okay, one. And he was just kind of like a maybe fan. Once he realized he was the only one raising his hand, he's like, yeah, never. That wasn't me. Ember. So yeah, so I was using Ember at the time, and I was trying to get an application shipped, and couldn't actually get it quite there where I wanted it, and our money ran out, and my time ran out, and so I was kind of sitting around scratching my head one day thinking like, man, why am I just dumb or something? Why couldn't I finish that project? And it was around, so this was late 2013. And React had actually been introduced at JSConf EU earlier that year by a man named Pete Hunt. And it was basically kind of laughed at, believe it or not. If you're new to React, you might not realize it kind of has a history. When it first came out, most people kind of laughed at it. They looked at this syntax right here, this kind of HTML in your JavaScript, and they're like, what in the world is that, right? It's just syntax sugar for a function call, but they kind of looked at that and they kind of shied away from it. But I had absolutely hit the bottom, right? Couldn't go anywhere, couldn't go any lower, so I was like, whatever, I'll head over here with these rejects and write some React. And just kind of fell in love with it. Ended up writing the router, and the rest is history. So I run this company now, and I publish open source code with my free time. All right. So anyway, React has changed quite a lot in the last couple of years. They've been pushing out a lot of new stuff. Most recently, React 16.3 dropped, what, 2-3 weeks ago, something like that, maybe 4. Now, it wasn't long ago, and added a couple of kind of new features. And I thought it might be fun, kind of a meetup environment where we're kind of laid back, to just kind of talk about some of these features and talk about, why they're useful, maybe why, where they came from, maybe a little bit of the history behind them, and talk about how we could actually take advantage of these features today. So that's assuming everybody's running React 16.3, right? Everybody's running 16.3. Yeah, right. Okay. The same guy who was running Ember actually. React 16.3, right on, man. Yeah, there you go. Right? He's a man of many talents. All right. So let's get started. There's probably the most. I'm not gonna kind of hold anything back. Probably the most exciting new feature in React 16.3 is this thing called context. Right? So for years, like for the last 2.5 years, there was this big warning message in the React docs that's like, oh, if you use context, you really shouldn't use it. If you use it, you better know what you... No, you know what? Never mind. Just don't use it. Please don't use it. Oh my gosh, don't use context. And so, I would go around and talk to people about context. I'm like, hey, Redux uses context, React Router uses context, and they'd kind of be like, well, does that mean... Is that okay then? I'm like, I don't know, the docs say it's not okay, but I think it's okay. So then they're like, yeah, you're full of it. So let's talk about kind of the why, about why there was a new context API, why they thought it was kind of a bad idea for a while, and we'll just go from there. So let's say And I'm gonna live code the whole thing, so what could possibly go wrong? So let's say we've got an app here, and let's say that we've got some state in this app. And for now, we'll just keep the date, okay? With a new date. So I'll say the date is a new date. Let's see, close that, and then we'll say every second, all right? And so now I can say hello. The time is this.state.date dot, what is it called, like toLocale string. I think that's actually, these date APIs, they get deprecated before they actually make it into browsers. They're like, no, that was the API last year. This is the new API. So I think this is actually old deprecated API. It's probably some new API. We might be able to just stringify it. I'm not sure. Anyways, not important. So, so we've got some state in this app, right? And you know, we can pass it down to children. So let's say I've got a child component here. I'll call this one the display. Okay. And this is just normal passing props. Okay, I'm gonna have a prop here. Let's see. Let's go up here and render a display. Actually, our display is just gonna do this. And up here now, we're just going to render a display, and the date we'll say is this.state.date. So now instead of getting the date from our state, we're going to get it from this prop, right? Oh, come on. Anybody else ever forget their return statements? Half the time I'm writing like arrow functions with an implicit return. The other half of the time I'm writing like real functions with a real return. And all right, it's all right. Okay. So what just happened, right? We're just passing the data down one level. Pretty vanilla React up to this point, okay? The problem, is, you know, we kind of might start to see some problems if we want to, you know, get a little bit more, maybe kind of, you know, flexible with this thing. Maybe instead of like hard coding a display here, maybe what we want to do is we want to like pass in the component that we'll call this the display component. And we'll have a display here. And so the app doesn't actually know anymore exactly which component it's going to render, so instead it's just going to render, you know, this.props.display component. Okay, so now our component can be dynamic, right? I can put whatever kind of component in there I want. It's going to get this prop, this date prop. It's going to show the date prop. So that's fine. What if I wanted to, you know, kind of, maybe I wanted to like completely decouple these things. And instead of having the display as like, or giving the app a reference to the display, right? I might want to have some other UI in here, or sorry, I might want to just express it like this. I'll have a display will be the child of the app. Okay, so instead of coming in this display component prop, it's coming in a children prop. And in this case, notice what's going on. So we're already creating an element down here, a display element. So we can't redo that work up here. But what we could do is we could clone the element and give it an extra prop, right? Does anybody ever use React clone element? Right? So what we could do is we could say react.clone element, this.props.children. By the way, don't do this at home because this.props.children is kind of opaque, and so this is naughty. But we'll be fine. It's just a meetup. We'll be all right. Okay. what I should do. Oh, how nice. Prettier just laid it all out for me. That was so nice of him. Okay, so we're getting kind of a little bit more like, how do we say this? Like, kind of a little bit more implicit as we go, right? Like, we used to just have a display hard-coded there, then we were passing in a reference to the display, but we were fairly certain like what it was. Now we're just like cloning the child element and hoping that it expects a display prop, or a date prop, which works fine until somebody comes along and puts, you know, they're like, hey, that would be cool if I could put some styling on this thing. And I actually want to put a font weight, or actually, yeah, font weight. Actually, no, divs are boring. Let's do a marquee. Uh-oh, what happened now? Right? We've taken display now far enough out of the app that the app is like, I no longer know what my child is. I hope my child expects a date prop, and Marquee's like, I don't know what a date. I don't know what to do with a date, right? So we've kind of got this. We wanted to like decouple it to have a little bit more flexibility in the rendering. We wanted to let somebody, you know, render it inside a Marquee if they wanted to, even though Marquee is dead and probably shouldn't be. It's a sad thing. But what we've got is we can't any longer make any sort of reasonable expectation that our children are going to accept this problem, okay? And so we actually ran into this problem in React Router a long time ago. The React Router API is kind of like this. You have a router that sits at the root of your tree, and it would be fine if everything was just a child of the router, because then the router could just communicate directly with its children and there would be no problem, right? But what happens when other kinds of UI starts showing up here? Right? And this can really go as deep as you want it to, right? So we can have a link that's nested all the way down in here in the tree, and how in the world is the router going to communicate with the link? For those of you who aren't familiar with React Router, it's a library for doing single-page applications, right? So if you have a link in the page, you actually want to intercept that click event and change the state in the parent. You're going to change the state all the way up to the router. You don't want to send another request to the server. That would defeat the whole purpose, because then you have a full page refresh. So you're building it like a single-page application is what they're commonly referred to, right? I guess today they're PWAs. Anybody define a PWA for me? Yeah, I really have no clue what PWA. I think it just means adios money. Like, gave you the stamp of approval. He's like, yes, this is a PWA. All right. Okay, so we had this problem in the router, and I was like, I mean, I seriously like scratched my head over this for years. I scratched all my hair off, scratched my head over this for a long time. I was like, how in the world, how do you do implicit communication in React? How do you pass these props all the way down the tree? Because we don't know how deeply nested these things can be. And so one day I was like, you know what, it's just JavaScript. React is just JavaScript. I've monkey patched many a JavaScript app in my time. I used to be a Ruby developer. Yeah, I think there's like a Ruby library called monkey patch, where you can just like require it and then like, who knows what's gonna happen next. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna dive into the React source and I'm gonna monkey patch it, right? I'm the exception. I'm gonna just monkey patch this stuff, and we'll see what happens. Let me actually go into the React source and I'll show you where I was. React Composite component. Oh, sorry. Oh, that's the test. I want. No, I need. It's like source shared reconciler. Give me a sec. Let's see. Find. I'm going to act for React Composite component in the packages React source. What the heck? Did it move? Again? Okay, you know what? Okay, let me do that one more time. Oh man, it's gone. Source. React, children, current owner, test, forks. I think it's actually in. This stuff moves around all the time. React reconciler. Source. I think we're getting closer. No, we're not. All right. I can't find it. How about I'll do this? There it is. What? Flow coverage report. Okay, it's gone. I don't know what happened to this file. Anyway, there used to be a file in here called React Composite Component.js, which apparently now they have tests for, but the actual file itself is gone. Don't ask me. All right. Anyway, I went diving into that file to see, what was going on, and I was like, I'm gonna hack this thing, right? And I saw a lot of stuff about props, and I saw a lot of stuff about state. And it seemed like every time I saw something about props, I also saw this thing about context. And it wasn't in the docs anywhere, and we were like, what is this thing called context? Maybe that's how I can hack it. Maybe that's how I can get my router and my links to talk to each other. Maybe that's my way in, right? So anyway, so I was actually at a conference, like the after party for a conference, and I went up and talked to one of the core React developers. His name was Sebastian. And I was like, Sebastian, hey man, I was looking through the React source, and I saw this thing called context, but it's not in the docs anywhere. Like, could you help me out? Could you help me understand what it is? And he's like, well, we don't really talk about it. I'm like, why don't you talk about it? He's like, well, it's not really stable yet. We thought it might be useful for routing. And I was like, you might know I'm building a router. Like, maybe we could use that. He's like, oh yeah, okay. So context is basically this way that we can communicate down the tree, right? So a parent can pass stuff implicitly all the way through the tree, all the way down to its children. So the router could communicate all the way down to the link, okay? I'm just going to leave this up here for a sec. Okay, so how could we use context in this situation, right? So the way that you use it, and by the way, I'm going to use the old API for just a second. Just for those of you who kind of aren't familiar with it. So basically what you would do is you would have the static child context types on the parent. And in this case, we can't pass the date down through a prop, so we're going to put it on context. We're going to have this thing called date on context, and it's going to be a prop type stop object. And then we would have this other method called getChildContext. And it would return an object with that same shape, right? So this.state.date. Okay, that's in the parent. Now down in the child, we would use static context types to say, look, I need a date thing. Okay? And now instead of getting that date from a prop, I could get it from this.context. All right. Problem solved, right? Yeah, we're done. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Oliver. Yeah. Okay, so this is the old API. Why is it old? What happened to it? What was so bad with it? Well, there's a little problem with something called should component update, right? So should component update is an optimization for React, right? It's a really important optimization. Basically what it says is, hey, if my props and my state don't change, it's a way for you to hook into the reconciler and say, if my props and my state don't change, then I don't need to be updated. Don't even render me, don't bother, right? I'm good. And so what you got is, let's see, let's say instead of a marquee here, we've got an update blocker. What is an update blocker, you might say? I'm glad you asked. Extends React. Like I didn't ask. All right. Update blocker is just going to render its children. Okay. So it's fine if update blocker just renders its children. We're still going to get the updates. But if update blocker implements should component update. And let's say just for the sake of argument, it's going to return false. Then our updates are blocked. Hence the name, update blocker. People have told me I have a talent for choosing good names. This proves it. Okay, so why, right? What is wrong with that? Well, update blocker, or should component update rather, has the ability to look at props, next, props, and next state, okay? But it can't look at the context, okay? Unless you define the context types here. In which case, it's going to get some context and it can take a look. But how on earth are you supposed to know which context types it's going to have in this situation? You don't. You cannot know, right? So we cannot look at our context and return something other than false. Most likely, you would have had like a pure component in your tree, right? Maybe you were using like something like Redux, right? Hold up. Oh, because it's still getting the prop. I was like, wait, they fixed it. No, they didn't fix it. All right. So instead, so this is just going to return this .props.children. Okay. And now we've stopped the time again. Okay. So again, app is just rendering its children. Update blocker is saying, I'm not getting any new props. And the display is blocked, even though we're using context, right? So this is the reason that they were like, context, it kind of exists, it kind of works, but not really. So if any app is using should component update, they're not going to know about the context that you're trying to pass all the way down the chain implicitly, and your app's probably going to break. And this caused us lots of heartache. Lots of heartache, okay? So it was like, okay, so we want to use the router context. We can't like really rely on context, and so we invented for a long time like all sorts of weird, crazy workarounds. One of which was called React Broadcast. React Broadcast was this library. Let me show you the API real quick. So we said reliably communicate state down the hierarchy, right? And it basically had an API like this. And how many people here are familiar with a render prop? A couple people here know what a render prop is. Okay, basically a render prop is a prop. So in this case, you would have like a provider component. It's got a value. And then you might have an update blocker in the tree, but it doesn't matter because the consumer can still get at the value in its render prop, okay? So this is currently a polyfill for the new React Context API. Our API was similar to this. Let's check it out because I've got React 16.3 on the page, so I'm using 16.3.2 here. So let's actually use the new Context API and see how we can get around this update blocker, this nefarious pure component. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create some context. I'll call it my date context. equals React.createContext. Boom. Just like that. And instead of using these child context types and get child context, that was the old API. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to render a provider. A date context dot provider. Okay. And the date context provider, let's see. Is going to get a value prop. Value equals this dot state dot date. All right? Pretty simple, right? We just render a component, and you know that this component is getting a new value on each render because it's getting a new prop. And so that's coming on down. Now down here in our display, context types aren't going to work anymore. So, so down here, instead, what we're going to do is we're going to render a date context dot consumer, and it's going to have a children prop that is going to get the date. Let's see. So instead of getting it from this dot context, I'm going to get that date in the render prop. There we go. So just to remind you, we've still got our old friend update blocker in the tree, but it's no longer raining on our parade because we've got this new blessed context API, right? So that's kind of what it's for, right? Is you've got some information, you need to communicate it down the tree, and there might be other things in the way, right? There could be other divs, or there could even be other like pure components that don't know anything about context, right? That might even be saying, you know, returning false from a should component update, and you can still pipe your updates further down in the tree. You can think of it kind of like you've kind of like drilled this hole down, you know, like passing some information way down the tree, okay? Now, you know, you can pass static information, you can pass whatever you want, right? You can pass a function, you can put whatever you want on context, right? This value property here can be whatever you want, okay? So just like normal children will pass functions down to their descendants so that those children can set state in their parents, you could do that as well. You could, in fact, in the router, what we're doing is we're passing down like all of the methods that you need to actually manipulate the current URL on context, and then those links can now just use those methods. Okay. So that's one of the kind of really cool new features in React 16.3. If you're not yet using React 16.3, you could just use React Broadcast. It's a polyfill that'll work in React 15 and below. And it's kind of, but yeah, it's just until you get the chance to upgrade, and then you can remove it. It's got the exact same API. Okay, so that was one of the kind of cooler things in React 16.3. There's also some kind of cool stuff that's not really shipped yet. It didn't ship in 16.3. In fact, I don't even think I have it yet here. Let me see. I'm going to have to yarn add the simple cache provider. Whew. All right. Now this is like bleeding edge stuff. My friend Ryan Florence always says, when you're on the bleeding edge, it's you that's bleeding. So be careful. Hope you brought your Band-Aids. We're going to go on the bleeding edge here. So that was one of the cool, interesting things from 16.3. There's also this kind of cool, like, how many people saw Dan Abramov's talk from JSConf Iceland? He was kind of talking about having this like way of fetching data inside your render method, right? Asynchronous kind of data fetching magic, right? So I kind of wanted to kind of dive into there and explore it. Now the APIs are going to fluctuate probably a lot before this actually lands in master in React itself. So I would just take everything that I say tonight with kind of a grain of salt. We're going to discuss like kind of the basic ideas behind it, but the APIs could definitely change. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to import. Let's see, there's a create oh, what do they call it? Create. It's not create fetcher, it's create cache from simple cache provider. Actually have this here. I'm going to copy some stuff. Ooh, I just cheated. Well, actually, no, I didn't because I'm in a separate tab. Let's see, did it work? Oh, yes. All right, we'll save us some time here. Okay, so this is kind of the idea, right? So I've got this method, create cache, from a simple cache provider, and the idea is, maybe you want to fetch some data asynchronously, and then you're going to cache it locally, so you don't have to actually do the same fetch twice, right? I mean, maybe you do want to do the same fetch twice, right? Which in that case we would have to have some way of sort of invalidating the cache. Well, let's just assume for now that we're going to cache everything, okay? And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to have a method here. Let's see. I'm going to comment these out. So I'm going to have a resource here called sum, okay? And this is going to be super, super basic demo. So the idea is that the sum resource is going to return a promise that resolves with the sum of A plus B. And then we've got a hashing function here that is designed to give us the exact same value anytime we request a value that we should be able to get from the cache, right? So it's fairly simple. It's we've got a function that fetches the data in case we don't have it yet, and then we've got a hashing function that determines, do we already have this? Given these inputs, do we already have some data that looks like this? Okay, pretty straightforward. And so the idea here, let's go ahead and let's rip some of this stuff out. I'm just going to go back to returning the stuff I was showing. Well, actually, I'll just return. I'm going to tear down everything that we built. Okay. Okay. So the idea here with this API is, typically if you want to fetch some data, the workflow kind of goes like this. Right, so I'm up here in my state, and I've usually got some kind of flag that's loading. And then my component did mount. I'm going to say, go ahead and do the fetch. Load the sum here of, let's just say the sum of 3 and 4. And then I'm going to get the value back. This dot sets state with the value. Okay. So let's have the value here. Okay, so immediately before we begin this fetch, what we're going to do is we're going to say set state loading true. And then when we get back, we're going to set state loading false, right? You've all done this before. So down here, we're going to get our loading value from state. And so look, we're going to say like this. Look, if we're loading, just, I don't know, return some spinner, right? Loading. Otherwise, return the value. The value is value. Okay, so super basic asynchronous behavior. In this case, the promise is resolving immediately, so we can't really see it. Let's head up here and let's really feel it. We're going to just use our old friend set timeout. Set timeout. After I don't know, 5 seconds. How long does it take to fetch data from your server? I'm sure nobody's slower than 200 milliseconds, right? Everybody's good, okay. So what we're going to do is resolve with the A plus B. And now we're sitting here looking at the loader, and okay. So this is kind of a typical flow, right? When you're doing some asynchronous loading, okay? And basically the React team, they look at this and they're like, okay, so there's like, this always happens, right? This loading state, you're not sure whether or not you're loaded. How can we kind of like generalize this into a way that people can you know, express in a little bit more declarative way? You'll notice, for example, down here in our render method, there's zero indication that we're actually like fetching something from the server, right? There's no like fetch component or something like that, right? Oh, you know what I should have done? I should have gone down here and I should have used the cache to load the thing. So we do sum dot read. There we go. Okay, so here's how we fetch it using the this resource and cache API, which again is not fully baked. So sum dot read from the cache, and then we're going to pass through these values. Okay. Except this time, the thing that sum.read is going to do is it's not actually going to return a promise. Okay? And it's a little bit tricky. Sum.read is actually going to throw a promise. You might be like, what? Yes. Catch the promise. Okay? This is, by the way, not how to program. I'm just, you know, whatever. Okay, so what we're going to do is sum.read is going to throw, we're going to catch it, and then we're going to resolve it. So our app should still work at this point. This is just to demonstrate the try-catch behavior. Okay, question. Why on earth are they throwing a promise? Like, what's going on? Okay, so the idea is that this thing isn't supposed to be used in your componented mount at all, right? The idea is we should be able to use it right down here, okay, in our render. Let's create a component, for example, that can like model this behavior. So if I have like a actually a sum async component, okay? Render, right? Return. Okay, so here we're going to say the sum is sum.read from the cache, and then we're going to have two props. This dot props dot A and this dot props dot B. So close our paragraph tag. Okay, so we're going to render a sum async here. Let's return a sum async, and we'll say how about A equals 3 and B equals 4. So all of that boilerplate kind of goes away. Okay. So it's the job of our sum async component to actually do this work here, this imperative work. Okay. And as you can guess, right now we're going to get an error in the console, right? The above error occurred in the async component. Well, that's not an error, that's a promise. Okay. All right. So the idea is, and unfortunately, as I said, I'm using 16.3, so I actually don't have the method here available, but I'm going to kind of work it a different way. And it's kind of experimental. Maybe you like it, maybe you won't. And I got the idea actually from this message here, right? They're like, consider adding an error boundary to your tree to customize the error handling behavior. So we'll revisit that in just a second. That's another feature of React 16 actually, is error boundaries. So the idea here is if we could just have the fetch right? If we can have the fetch right here in the render method, then we would make this code much more declarative, right? Because right now I can see, right here in the render, that there is some reading going on from a cache, right? There's potentially some asynchronous behavior, right? Maybe it resolves synchronously, maybe we've already got the value cached, maybe it resolves asynchronously. But in any case, I'm expressing my data dependency right here in the render method itself, okay? That's the important part, I think, about this API. And so they want it to feel like it's declarative, right? I've got some code in my render method, and I can read and I can see that data dependency expressed right here. Okay? So what's with the throw, right? The idea is that built into React, there is going to be a catch, right? Somewhere in the React tree, there's going to be a catch. They can catch that promise, wait till it resolves, and then try and render again. And hopefully this time you can render synchronously and you won't throw a promise, right? Does that make sense? So given the fact that I'm running 16.3 and I'm not running like some crazy experimental branch, quite honestly, I tried to get the crazy experimental branch to build, but I couldn't figure out how to do it. I was bleeding on the bleeding edge. So what I thought was, since it's throwing, couldn't we do something like this? Has anybody ever worked with like async await? Yeah, async await, right? You use it all the time in your node code, right? And await is basically the way that you say, hey, wait right here for the promise to resolve, and then you can continue on the next line, right? What if we could express that as like a component? So instead of having like my just rendering my sum async thing here, I could actually put like an await component here. Okay, so what am I trying to express with this await component? I'm basically saying, look, here's the boundary where asynchronous behavior stops, right? And all asynchronous stuff underneath this boundary, this is where we're going to catch it and we're going to resolve. And I could even include like a children prop to say like, are we currently resolving? If we are resolving, I could say something like, hey, resolving. Otherwise, I could render. Okay? So this is kind of an experimental API. Let's check out what this await implementation might look like. So here's my asynchronous component. Let's build an await component. By the way, if you like this component, you're free to go and publish it on NPM and maintain it for the rest of your life. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use another feature of React called component did catch. It's kind of a funny name. Component did catch is the way that we define an error boundary, right? So if anybody if any child in the tree throws, what we're going to do is we're going to catch it right here. Component did catch what? Well, I'm going to say, look, if what is a venable, if what then? I'm going to say, basically I'm going to say this. I'm going to say, I'm going to have some state here. It's going to be am I resolving? By default, we're false. As soon as we catch, we're going to say this dot set state resolving to true, right? So we can let our children know this dot props dot children with this dot state dot resolving. Okay? So that's the contract that we have with our children in this await component. We're going to tell it whether or not we're busy doing some asynchronous stuff. And if we are, they can render a spinner or whatever they want. Okay? Now up here, what we can say is, well, so here, we can just throw. Because we don't know what it is. We'll throw what. But if it is a promise, we could resolve it right here, right? What.then, and then basically get the, wait for it to resolve. And then we could say, sorry, this dot set state resolving false. Similarly, we should probably have a catch on here, which is basically just going to do the same thing. Work. All right. I think that's it. So what if we had this await component on the initial render? It's going to be resolving false, and we're going to try our asynchronous behavior, right? At which point cache is going to throw. Await's going to catch it, wait for it to resolve, and try rendering again. In the meantime, it's going to render with this resolving message. See if it works. Cross your fingers. And it doesn't. Resolving is not defined. What do you mean resolving is not defined? Oh, this needs to be a function. So many functions. Ah, not bad, right? Console's ugly, crazy, and full of red. Looks like somebody died in there. But we've modeled some kind of asynchronous behavior up here using this kind of await component, right? So anyway, like I said, this is not the await. So the simple cache provider stuff is like potential React API, right? This await thing is something that I just made up because I like doing everything with components. So sue me. But the other kind of API that's on the table, which, as I said, I can't get it to work because I couldn't get the build to work, is there's something called, so you could say like, basically there's going to be some behavior here, right? Maybe you click on a button or something. So go down here, click on the button, and then say on click equals this dot handle click. Okay. And so the idea here is you've got some state that's like show the async stuff false. And when you click the button, you're going to set that true. Except you're not going to use SetState. You're going to use, okay, you're not going to use SetState. Here, let me comment this stuff out for now. Oops. Okay. Still need to teach my editor how to comment out JSX. And so in this case, you would say this.state.show async stuff and go ahead and do this sum, right? Okay. So go ahead and show the async stuff. So this is not going to be a normal set state. The API that was proposed in Dan's talk is defer set state. Okay. So a set state that happens in response to a defer set state call means that you're going to have like some other components that can sort of like magically handle or magically do the catch for you and give you some sort of a declarative API for, you know, what do I render when I'm loading and what do I render when I'm not loading, right? So that is kind of the proposed API. Or you could just use this little await component and you could use it today. Anyway, that's all I got. Component did catch, context, kind of some previews into the murky waters of async React stuff. Are there any questions? Yes?
How would you say the context compares to Redux and Composite? I legitimately don't know.
Oh, yeah, no, okay, I thought you were trolling me. All right. I'm just kidding. Yeah, so how does context compare to Redux and MobX? So I don't really know MobX very well, so I'm just going to speak to Redux. So Redux uses context behind the scenes. So Redux basically distributes state down to your components, which is nice. You keep all the state up in the top, and you connect these components, and then it distributes the state down to them. But Redux is more than just a distribution mechanism. You also have this idea of reducers, right? So, you know, an actions, that's another idea. You have an action that comes in, it affects the state, you reduce it down to some other kind of state. So, although, so Redux uses context to distribute the state behind the scenes, but the new context API isn't going to completely replace Redux if you're looking for that kind of like action reducer sort of behavior, right? There are other concepts that Redux adds on top of just the state distribution mechanism. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Good question. Any other questions? Yeah.
So in the old version of context, you would define that with prop types. So you've got some limited type checking there.
Yeah.
And the new one, you don't. So
yeah, no, you don't.
Is there any way to do that, or is there a need to still?
Yeah. So the question is, with the old version of context, we could use prop types in our context types, and in our child context types, we could have some types. Golly, that word is overloaded. We could have some kind of type checking. How can we do that with this new context API? Okay, so I deleted all my code, but if you recall, it looked something like this. So we have like our date context. So the thing is, at Facebook, flow is all the rage, right? And the flow types, right? And so Facebook, you might have noticed this, they're not too keen on like maintaining things that they just like don't use. So, you know, they're like prop types, whoosh, removed. It is now like its own package. Create class, whoosh, gets the X, right? So a lot of stuff that they don't use kind of gets removed. And so the way that they're proposing to get type checking back into your context is you're going to have something here like, so this thing right here is your default value. So I actually omitted it in the previous exercise, or the previous example, because I didn't need the default value. But let's say for example you render one of those consumers outside of the tree of a provider, right? In which case it would get this default value, okay? And the way that you would type it is you would give it some kind of a type. Like, how do you write the flow types again? You write them like this, like date or something like that. Is that how you write them? Anybody know?
After create context, before the parentheses.
Oh, before the parentheses, like right here.
Yeah.
Okay. Right, see, I had a hunch there were only like 2 people here out of the like 200 who actually use flow. It's kind of a thing that, okay. So anyway, I've used it a little bit, but I haven't used it a ton. But anyway, this is how you get your types back, basically, right? You say, hey, there's something on context, here's its type, and then whenever you got a consumer, right, who's got the, so I'm going to render a date context.consumer. It's got its children thing, so this is going to get the date out of here. Basically, I would have some way to kind of annotate that as well. So I think maybe like this, or like this.
It should automatically get the type.
Should automatically just get it.
Yeah, because you have it in the create context.
Okay, cool. So that's how you do your type checking. And again, I don't write a whole lot of type checked code. I know that there are some people who swear by it. Maybe I should, but I can't speak any more to it. But the answer is, in short, we're just going to use a typed language, either flow or TypeScript. Yeah. Yeah.
Can you speak to an example where you're using the REST forwarding API?
Oh yeah, the new REST forwarding API. Yeah. So let's see. So the REST forwarding API, it's mainly useful, as far as I can tell, when you're doing higher order components. Okay. So if I'm doing a higher order component, let's say, so the classic use for refs is like an input, right? Like focus on an input, okay? So let's say, for example, I've got this button, and Well, let me just say, for example, I've got a class that I don't have time to like type it out, but let's say I've got a class that wraps an input, and I want to put a ref on the input, but if I put the ref on the class, then I've got the ref on the wrong thing, right? I've got a ref on a React component instance. And so what I want to do is I'll create an object, which is the ref, and then it doesn't actually get, so the API is react.createRef. And the idea is that that object somehow doesn't get actually applied until the component is actually rendered. So even if I pass this object to another component as its ref, that component could pass it down to the input component and say, look, here's your ref, at which point it will be applied. So even a parent could pass this thing sort of through multiple levels of the hierarchy down and actually get it applied on the element that it needs to. As opposed to the ref API now, where your ref is essentially just a function, you know, and you would have to, I guess, pass that function all the way down. You know, or the API before it, which was just a string, which really wasn't very flexible at all. So yeah, I can't. It would take a while to like write out an example right now, but that's the basic idea, as I understand it.
Is that available to?
Create ref is in 16.3, yeah. And there's another thing called like forward ref too, right? They actually had a really great blog post on it. There it is. Fancy button. There you go. You create your ref, you pass your ref. Higher order components. Maybe one of the reasons I don't know very much about the refs is because I don't use them all at higher order components. Any other questions?
No.
Right back here in the corner.
Yeah, back to the Redux question. If you're using Redux, when would you prefer the context versus using Redux to pass it down?
Like I said, Redux uses context. So you're already using context. So I guess if you didn't want to have, if you didn't care about having a reducer or any of the action or any of that kind of structure, right? Essentially, if you didn't want to create like 5 files every time you created a new component, maybe you would just use context. Sorry, that was a low blow. No, you could. Yeah, if you didn't need the rest of what Redux provides and all you need is a data distribution mechanism, you could just use context. Yeah. One last question, then we'll wrap it up because everybody's looking at me like, oh my gosh, shut up. Yeah.
Instead of like worrying about the new context of API, how to affect Redux, how about the async rendering behavior may affect Redux or React router?
Yeah. Yeah. So.
Because typically we have to like put the async stuff in like actions.
Yeah.
Places.
Yeah. So how is the async stuff going to affect like React router, for example?
Yeah.
As far as I can tell, and I'm not trying to be facetious I mean, we're just using components. You know, that was actually one of the things that we learned really early on in the router. Was if we had a bunch of our own custom API, if I had a bunch of my own like methods and stuff, when the React API changed, we were going to be in for a bad time, right? But if our entire API and the entire React Router API now is just components, we have 2 methods that are not just components, and they're mainly useful in static routing scenarios, like on the server. But the whole rest of the API is just components. Then we're going to be fine, right? Because our API is the React API, and they're not going to break the React API. They're not going to break the component API. So if our API is just components, we're good. As far as the way it affects Redux, I can't really speak very well to that because there's a lot of API in Redux that is not component API, right? You have the connect, which is the higher order component. You have the provider, which is a component. But then you've also got the create store and the middleware and the reducers and all that stuff, which is not React API. So I don't know specifically how the async stuff will affect them. But that was one of the major reasons that we went with just components, was just because when React changes, we're right there with it. Yeah. Hey, thank you very much. You know, I was in Chicago a couple weeks ago, and they said that they're like, "Oh, you going to Boston?" They're like, "Those people in Boston, they don't make good pizza." So I just want to let you guys know they were wrong. It's good pizza, and you guys have been very friendly, and I've loved being here. Thank you very much. I'm Michael Jackson.